Yes.
Okay, we should be good to go. So because there are some new people, I'm going to give a general orientation in a second, but I thought I would just start with a few preliminary comments. Uh, some of you may ask, well, why do we have a workshop? Well, I think some of you have already hinted that people are interested in data or data, as you say, south of here. Um, some people refer to data as the new oil, meaning every industry relies on data to make decisions. So I think clearly that's one reason. Second of all, with machine learning and artificial intelligence, I think if you don't have some background in data science, at least an introduction, you're going to feel lost. And also at the same time, it never hurts to rekindle things that you one time understood about, say, sensitivity, specificity, and so forth. So we'll cover a lot of new stuff and we'll cover some old stuff. Uh, so I think for me, also, I'm a reviewer for multiple medical journals. And when I look at articles now that suddenly are using new algorithms like XGBoost and so forth and so on, I knew that I needed to know more. So I've spent a long time trying to find tools and methods because you obviously need the experience, you need good data, and it helps to have tools as well. Some of you might ask, well, why did you pick orange? And let me see if I can show a slide here. Basically, over the last 5 years, I've used these different, I'm going to say tools, data science platforms or tools. These are all free educational ones. They all have merits, but they also have holes. So this is just my evaluation. It's not scientific, but my point is I picked orange because I thought it was by far the most comprehensive, yet the most intuitive. Now, the textbook, what is it? Well, it started off as just a guide how to use orange, and then people kind of said, well, why don't you beef it up with way more information about data science? Well, I've done that. And you might say, well, aren't you finished? The answer is no. Even today, I took out something in this chapter, I'll explain to you when we get to it, and replaced it with something that's newer. I'm working on adding a section on odds ratios, probability, and log odds and so forth. So I've got stuff in plan to add. So plan on every time we have a session, you'll get a new version of the book and I'll explain what I added. It won't be a whole lot, but it'll be slightly enhanced. But at this point, the purpose of the book is purely to support these workshops, to give you something to read ahead of time. We hope that this will be a flipped classroom, meaning that you'll try to go through the chapter and you'll try to do the workflow, and then we'll discuss it, maybe not go over every detail during the actual session. So I'll try to send the workflow file, which is called an OWS. When you're done here, by the way, with your own, if you add stuff, go up to File and just put Save or Save As and save it as an OWS. It'll go to your documentation and it'll be saved and you can share it. That's one of the beauties of Orange. Also, I plan to share articles. I'm going to, Saigon and I can talk offline. We can put the articles on the MIS website. There's a lot of things that we can do with it. We're talking about creating a YouTube channel for the videos. That's easy to do. We may do that. If you have any data, please do share it if it's anonymized or de-identified, because I think one of the problems I see in education is I have lots of data sets, but none of them are fantastic. They tend to be small. Some of them are overly clean, like no missing data. So they're not necessarily the biggest, the best choice, but we go with what we have. Now, I think and lastly here on my list of things to mention is please consider joining the MIS Society. If you're a student, it's free. Yeah, I think if you're in training, it's $25. If you're an attending physician, it's $100 a year. The meetings are great, and there are other benefits like the summit. So please look at that when you get a chance. So again, I'm assuming everybody has downloaded Orange, but that's an assumption where I could go wrong. Has anybody not downloaded it? If you'd put it in the chat, I'm hoping y'all are looking at the same screen I'm looking at. All right. I'm going to assume then that everybody has something similar that they're looking at, just as an orientation for new people and a refresher for others, is that this is the way the screen looks. You won't have all of these menus or modules on the left. To get all of those, you go to options, add on, and then here's where you check the box and you add, if for instance, you don't have educational, check it, click OK, and then when you click OK, it restarts orange. So that's important to get started. I expect you all to look at a lot of these to see what they do. I'll explain, for instance, we're going to drag out data sets here, just as it'll be a refresher for some and new for others. Let me see what's in the chat here. Okay, so yeah, I think there's time for you to actually download it and get started if you want. It's fairly easy to load and get going. So this is the file menu. And just to, again, as a refresher, you've got several choices here. Number one, the file menu comes with, I think, 6 preloaded programs. See the ones down here, and also the heart data set comes in it. We're going to be using this heart disease data set many times. So it comes in the file menu itself. If you click on the folder here, you can upload your own. It just takes you to, a folder, depending on whether you have a Mac or Windows. Now, hopefully I did not create an issue with Orange by doing that. That's not what you want to see. I may, every once in a while, Orange, this will be a technical error. See, this says file 2. I apologize. The last thing you want to have is a technical glitch. Let me see if it's, I guess it's back working. Sorry. So as you click on file, as I started to say, and I don't know why. Oh, here we go. So this is very helpful. You can also download data by just clicking URL. This is a data set that Vanderbilt has. And if you click the URL and go to the data, it's automatically uploaded. You don't have to do anything. So that's useful. It tells you there's 303 patients or instances or rows, 13 features, very few missing data. And so here, it tells you that age is numerical. It's a feature. You could change it to something else. You could skip it if you didn't plan to use it. So basically, you go down through every one of these features to be sure if it's correct, categorical, like fasting blood sugar, it's either abnormal or normal, so it's 0 or 1. But if that was wrong, you could click on it and change it. As just an example. And it's always important for the models that we create. Almost always you're going to want to set a target. What is it you're trying to predict? So in this case, we're predicting heart disease. They use the term diameter, which means do you have coronary disease? But that's the target. And when you're done, you pick apply and it's loaded. It's that easy. So that's how you get to the heart disease. But I wanted to point out there are 65 data sets here under data sets. So you can play with lots more. Some are medical, some are not. It tells you whether the origin of it. It also tells you whether it's categorical or numeric. Uh, so this is very useful. It's a great little library to play with, if you will. All right, is everybody able to open file? I want you to connect to the data table that should already be connected. Open it up. Does everybody see that? Okay. Now, this is like looking at a spreadsheet like Excel as an example of Google Sheets, but it doesn't do a whole lot. You do have the option, though, of sorting. So in other words, I just clicked on age, and so it's starting at the youngest and going to the oldest. Click again, and it goes from the oldest back to the youngest. So you can do some sorting. And one of the things that's really impressive, that's really nice, is that you can select. Well, let's go back and do the young people again. So these people, for whatever reason, got cardiac catheterization. Let's select everybody below the age of 40. You can then save this, just these people, or send it to another data table. In other words, if I highlighted those, I just add another data table, and now I just have that cohort of young people. So anytime, in fact, that you're using Orange and you've made a change, go ahead and drag in a data table and be sure you see the change. In other words, if you got rid of all missing data by imputation, you fed in the mean for missing numerical numbers, hook up a data table and be sure that took place, that you actually see that. A day or two ago, I'm just going to do another one here, just to show people, if you drag out pivot table here, and I'll wait a minute to let you all do that. Let me know if anybody has any trouble with that. Drag out the pivot table, connect it to file. If any of you've used Excel for pivot tables, you know it takes you like 20 minutes to figure it out. Here, let's just open it up. And what I was looking for my odds ratio lesson is trying to create my own 2x2 table of men versus women, heart disease, yes or no, to see how much, how greater the odds of a male compared to the female. Well, all I had to do was put gender here and heart disease here, but put count. That's all I had to do. So that's made it really easy to give you an idea. And you can also do things like, let's just see how cholesterol is different in men and women. So up here at the top, 0 means no heart disease, 1 means heart disease. And actually, let's see, we want to see the mean is what we were looking for. So you can see that for females, actually people with heart disease have a higher cholesterol, and males the same way. But we have better ways to show whether that's statistically significant or not. My only point here is look how fast it was to do a pivot table to turn the data around to analyze a little bit further compared to doing it in Excel. By the same token, I'll mention, I maybe won't demonstrate it, is generally when you merge two tables, like two CSV files, let's say you want to add 3 columns from a CSV file to an existing CSV file. Normally, you'd write a short SQL query and do it, a join. But here, if you use the merge, it's pretty idiot-proof, and you can just append it. You've added it. You just use, and you have to have a common thing like a patient number. But once you select patient number, it joins the files. You can't beat that. All right, one of my favorites, and I'm just showing this, is the box plot, because you can do so much with it. I've clicked down here basically by the group. Diameter narrowing, again, means they had cardiac catheterization, and those that had coronary artery disease with a diameter of a coronary artery less than 50% were labeled heart disease. If less than 50% were labeled no heart disease. Now we know that's not completely legitimate, but the point is this allows us to look at things like maximum heart rate on the treadmill. Did the people with heart disease quit earlier? Yes, they did. So their maximum heart rate was 139, people without heart disease 158. And then what I like about it is notice it puts a t-test down here. So it's statistically significant. So that already tells you what you just did is statistically significant, okay? So what I would tell students starting is look at everything. Go ahead and so that's numerical. Let's look at another one that's numerical. Cholesterol, I like to beat up on a little bit. It's not statistically significant between people with and without heart disease. Now, that being said, I have tried very hard to see if any of these people are on statins. I don't know that. So that may be part of the reason. But the point is, you can look at all combinations, and this is where you do exploratory data analysis. So let's go ahead though. What's I think pretty cool is you can also look at categorical data, and then you get a chi-square to tell you whether it's statistically significant. So I mean, remember, go up here. 0 means no heart disease. 1 means they had an abnormal cardiac catheterization. So automatically you can start looking at thallium test for those of you. It's a heart scan that basically is taken up by the heart muscle. So this is a stress thallium. So what you would expect in normal people is the scan would be normal. But interestingly enough, there are some people with fixed defects and a reversible defect, which I find interesting. A coronary spasm, what is that? Here's a pearl. Remember what I told you about the data table? Well, what you can do, if I can show this, I don't know if that's, I can't tell if that's being highlighted. I think it is. Let me put this down. Let's connect the box plot to a data table and see if, but you can highlight almost anything and send it to a data table. Yeah, so these are people basically that had a negative cardiac cath, 0 in other words, but they had all reversible thallium tests, which is interesting. I don't know, Zidon, any cardiology words of wisdom there about why you're seeing reversible defects on thallium and yet the cardiac cath looked okay?
Well, options include maybe microvascular dysfunction, and then it could also be spasm, which is less likely. And there's always the possibility that 50% that they called it was probably underestimation of the lesion, and it was actually significant. Yeah. These are the options that immediately spring to mind.
Yeah. So, I mean, the point on top of that, every test has false positives, false negatives. But my point is, so we're not going to spend too much time on this. Some of you need to go back and read the previous chapters, but for almost anything you click on, in other words, let's take a decision tree where you happen to see a node in the tree that looks real interesting of a group of patients. Click on it and send it to a data table, and now all you have are those patients alone. Then what you can do is say, well, that's the people I'm really interested with. You do save data. Now you have the selected patients and you save that as a CSV file. That could be your new study patient. So I think that's pretty slick, the fact that you can do that. There's this kind of endless little tips here. For instance, the other things, right click one of these connectors and it says insert widget, and that brings this up. So let's say you want to do select columns, just put SE and there's select columns, and you could insert that widget and take out columns, or select rows and take out rows. It can do a whole lot. In fact, select rows is how you can filter people. Give me women who are over age 60, who have reversible defects, blah, blah, blah. And you can do that by just select rows. Okay, data sampler. And I'll explain this more detail when we go over the book part, but if you just want to take a quick look at your data and you want to run a few algorithms, then you really don't have to use the data sampler. But the whole point of it is, if you're going to do a legitimate study, you need to break it in, the data, into training and test data. So here, this is by default 70-30, 70% training, 30% testing. One little thing that caught me that I missed was you want to be sure that this stratified sample is checked. Why that is what that'll do is, and I almost have to explain that once we get into the textbook part. This will be, if you have, say, 20% heart disease, every data sample is going to have 20%. And then we'll need to explain that once we get into the textbook. So anyway, after I've clicked that, I hit sample data. So what have I done? Let me get you to make sure you've clicked that stratified data. Now let me show you this part. Right click this and hit reset signals. This is what you want. So data sample means the training, the bulk of data. Sample is going to data. The remaining data is going to test data. Does that make sense? So training is going to data up here. Everything else, which is the test data, the 30%, goes to test data. Why is that important? When you open test and score, you're going to want to toggle between training and test data. And you can do that. And look how fast it was to go from getting the results from train to test. Now, I'm going to need to explain what cross-validation is when we get to the textbook part. But if all you want to do is take a quick look-see to see how your model did, there's nothing wrong with just looking at the training data. It's not the end story. You do need to run it on data the model hadn't seen. But notice, number one, how fast it was. Number two, you can add stuff. If you right-click on model, if you needed to do train time and test time, maybe you had a gigantic data set and you want to see how many milliseconds, but you can add and subtract these. I basically use all of these, so that's the ones I want. So notice, though, you need to say you're looking for people with heart disease, try to predict that. So that's why you're selecting 1, not 0. Now, you could predict how well does the model predict the lack of heart disease, and just compare the two. But generally, 1 means the category or class that you're interested in, okay? I do want to emphasize, though, that I want you to come, I'm going to close these just to make the screen smaller. Go to model and go ahead and let's do, let's say naive Bayes. Let's drag it out and just connect it like this to test and score. Notice how fast that was. And so there's naive Bayes, which really is performing as well as random forest. One of the things that you'll notice here is for fairly simple data sets, the old guys like logistic regression and naive Bayes do as well or better than some of the newer programs. That may be a shocker, but that's the way it is. So the other thing you can do, and I'll demonstrate some of this, is when you open logistic regression, there's some things you should know about. One of them is, let's say you have 80% benign patients and only 20% cancer patients and something you're analyzing, that's a class balance problem and it screws up the performance. We're going to go into that in much more detail called class imbalance. One of the ways that helps is this: if you click balance class distribution, that will weight the minority class. It'll favor the minority class, and this is completely legitimate, okay? So that you can do that in both logistic regression and random forest. Both of those you can weight so that if you have class imbalance, the results are going to be better, they're going to be more accurate. Now, generally speaking, you can modify or tweak every one of these algorithms, but I caution you at this point, don't do it. We'll talk about what ridge and lasso regression is or regularization. Right now, you don't need to worry about it, but just understand if somebody said, well, let's say it doesn't look very sophisticated. The answer is you can open any of these and tweak it. Let's see, Zidon, I saw you had your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, just on my workflow, the logistic regression connection was dotted and I had to reset the signals and rerun it.
Yeah.
Is everyone okay with their, so if you can't see logistic regression in test and score, you just need to rerun it and it will fix itself.
Just thanks, Zidon. It's the one algorithm, and it didn't used to be this way. It's the one algorithm that you have to click apply. Again, I guess if you click apply automatically, but it's changed. Before it automatically did it. Now you have to manually do it or make sure that this is checked. Otherwise, you won't see logistic regression here. In other words, it won't calculate. So again, I think you can see how easy this is to set up a model. Again, if all you want is a quick look-see to say, does your model have any real future to it? You don't really have to split it into train and test. You can just do the train and get a ballpark, if you will. But if you're going to do a real study, you're going to want to compare, because let's, for instance, look at logistic regression. Training is AUC is generally what you pay the most attention. It's 0.925. That's real good. Perfect would be 1. So it drops to 871. We'll explain why that is. So basically, the model is learning on the data, and then you send it data it hasn't seen before and see how close it comes. And there are reasons why it may not be as good. And we'll cover that, and go over in detail. But the test and score is a pleasure because you could run 11 algorithms, get the results all at one time, both train and test. I'm not aware of any program that'll do that. So confusion matrix, I can't tell you how many times I used the confusion matrix. Everybody, I mean, now, but that being said, I understand why they called it a confusion matrix. Confuses people. It causes errors. It's also called an error matrix, believe it or not. But here, notice that, so this is the confusion matrix for logistic regression. Here's one, you click it, it'll change it to random forest, click it again, naive Bayes. So we'll go over this in the textbook, but this is really interesting. Let's say, so up here is predicted and over here is actual. Actual means they had cardiac cath. So actual 1 means they had an abnormal cardiac cath. So here, you go up that predicted it was normal, but it was abnormal. So these are false negatives. Let's click on it. So if I click on it, as you should, what do I want to connect it to in order to see those patients? I hope you know. Anybody want to? You got it. So let's do that. Let's hook a data table, my best friend, to just the false negatives. There's your false negatives. So you could then data mine that and say, well, what about them looking at the EKG, looking at the thallium, looking at all these other variables, what was different about them. So that's how you can kind of data mine, if you will. But we're going to get into this because this is where you calculate sensitivity, specificity, false positives, false negatives. And from that, you calculate all the goodies like likelihood ratios, odds ratios, you name it. I looked at a study yesterday where all they gave me sensitivity, specificity, but they told me there were 280 patients in the study and 180 had cancer. From just those facts, I could create this table. From that, I could do odds ratios and probabilities. But it's so important to have a confusion matrix that many editors, I say many, that's not true. A certain number of editors insist that you add the confusion matrix when you publish an article, because in one of my reviews, the authors had sensitivity and specificity backwards. How did I know that? By looking at this and calculating it on my own. So I can't emphasize enough how important this is. Once you've done it for a while, you'll get used to it and you'll understand that predicted is what the model's predicting, but the actual, you have to have ground truth, it's called. A biopsy would be ground truth. In the case of that I looked at yesterday, it was ovarian cancer. They all had a either a laparoscopy or something, but they all had biopsies. So that's how you came up with 1 and 0. And then they use ultrasound, MRI, and CT to see what its sensitivity and specificity. But please get used to looking at this. We're going to go over it in the book. Okay. Receiver operator curve. We'll go over this more in the book, but this is really pretty cool stuff. Notice that the curve is not smooth. You will see it in plenty of diagrams where the curve is smooth. It shouldn't be. Why? Because what they don't tell you in the books is each one of these is a different threshold. I'll have to explain to you with the drawing what a threshold is. The default is 0.5. However, that has nothing to do with this axis or this axis. So that's where the confusion is. I'll try my best when we get to the book portion to explain that so you truly understand it. But the point is, you're evaluating the the true positive rate against the false positive rate at various thresholds. The default is 0.5, so that any data point above 0.5 is considered a positive or a 1. Anyone below that is considered a 0. But you can shift it up or down, and you can change the sensitivity or specificity that will demonstrate. But that's why you're seeing this raggedy. Also notice the false positive rate is the same thing as 1 minus specificity. So if you're over here at 0.1, 1 minus 0.1 is 0.9, 90% specificity. Carry that line up here. So not 90% specificity and a sensitivity of about 70%. So you can play on this curve and see as your sensitivity rises, your specificity drops, and you could look at all of these, and there are educational tools I'll show you in a minute that help with that. But it's important to understand that the goal here is to be in this upper left quadrant. Whoops, and let's change, I apologize. Always have to put the target, what you're aiming at. There we go. Didn't change it all that much. But anyway, always if there's a target, you put it to whatever category, 1 meaning heart disease. But what I started to say is, so what you want is up here, is this is true positive or sensitivity. You want it up here, if possible. It also means that your false positive rate is low, but it's all a compromise. So up here on this curve, somewhere in here is probably the best compromise. I suspect 0.5 is in here somewhere. All right, but we'll go over the rock curve in more painful detail in a minute. Calibration curve we'll go over also, because pretty much everything we've been talking about is model discrimination. Can it discriminate between people with heart disease, without heart disease, kind of like two distributions that don't overlap? However, calibration is a different animal. It really is more to do, and let me check logistic regression. If you go down here and the model predicted the chance or the odds of heart disease, or probability rather, is 60%, and you go up to this line and go over, the model actually was 60%, the ground truth, the cardiac catheterization, so to speak. However, there are models which do a lousy job. If they were down here low, they would overestimate, let's say in this case, heart disease. So you want calibration. I'll show you how they came up with this in just a second. So calibration really means how close all these data points. These are the 303 patients, by the way. See all those little dots? There's 303 patients in this data set. So that's what they are. And this is pretty good. Calibration is good. However, good calibration doesn't necessarily mean good discrimination and vice versa. A kind of pearl of wisdom. Very few articles include calibration, and yet that's what the experts want you to do. So how do you get calibration? The answer, predictions. Let's open that up. Does everybody see the predictions? Okay.
Yeah, I see.
Okay. So what this is remember, like for logistic regression, you're really predicting zeros and ones. Zero, no heart disease, one heart disease. But do you think that it's so good that that's really what happens? No. And so that here, for instance, you start with the top one. Let me try to, you may want to spread these apart a little bit. There we go. Let's just focus on logistic regression. So this first patient had heart disease, logistic regression, random forest, and naive Bayes all said, yay, that's what it is. So when it predicted lack of heart disease, it's darn close to zero. And when it predicted logistic regression, darn close to one, it's 0.999. But let's go down this list a little bit. And you'll notice down in here's, for instance, let's go over here. And I don't know if that's organized. I don't think it's organized to the best at the top either. But so we go down here and they had heart disease. Logistic regression said they did. Random forest said they didn't. But when you look at how well it predicted zero, not very well. How well did it predict the one? Not very well. So they do this for every single patient, and that's where you get that curve. Does that make sense? In other words, if all of these were ones and all of these were zeros, that calibration curve that I showed you would be perfect. It would be straight up this 45-degree angle line. All right, while we're here, please open the calibration curve and I'm going to sip of water. You may want to play with this. Notice there are other curves here. And I think this gives you a good sense of a kind of a trial and error. So notice down here, threshold probability to classify as positive. Well, first of all, let's go to 0.5. That's the default, right? But that's just kind of a compromise. And over here, go over to the left and do the down, whatever you want to call this thing. And so automatically, so if your threshold's 0.5, your sensitivity is 0.756, your specificity is 8.75. So not bad, not terrific either. So what happens if let's go over here where they cross and see what happens. Aha. Sensitivity, so the threshold is now 0.37. Sensitivity is 805, specificity 816. My point to you is with certain data sets of different flavors, you may actually want to adjust it. In fact, this is one of the techniques or tricks. If you have imbalanced data set where you have too much of one class, particularly the class you want to predict, you can shift the threshold and it'll give you better results. So threshold shifting is a legitimate term. So that's sensitivity, specificity. I would ask you to play with these. Same thing here. Let's go back to the default of 0.5 of precision and recall. And we'll go over this. So that's 0.5. So precision is 0.838, pretty good. Recall 0.756, but let's go where they cross. And let's see, what did that do? 7.8. So actually it's a little bit worse. So the best compromise probably was here, but you could go way over here and do a threshold of 0.6, but then recall drops. It's a compromise again. But I just wanted to point out that you have these educational tools I have never seen anywhere else, not in any article, not in any machine learning program at all. So I think, let me stop there for a second. This is a quick overview. We'll be doing this more. Remember, there's a chapter on classification where we do a lot of it. There's a chapter on regression. We'll do more of it. And then there's a chapter where we sum chapter 8, where we pull all this together and do all of this on a new data set. Zidon, I see your hands raised.
Bob, I seem to be getting slightly different readings than you. So I just wonder if you can click on logistic regression just to see if you've changed some of the parameters than what I have.
Zidon, I noticed that Bob has a set of 90 patients, but I have 213. So it may be what's been selected.
All right, well, that's a very good point, because let's just look at this. Let's see. It's not going to be the 303, I don't think. Let's see. Actually, that's not giving me a counter, is it?
It's 90 at the
If
bottom.
you look on the bottom left of that screen, it says 90.
Yeah, that's the test patients. There's another way to do that.
I have
yeah, so there's another way. You simply connect file to the say logistic regression, then on to predictions, and we can do that. Let me show you how easy it is.
Bob, maybe you sampled them. Maybe it's in the sampler. You selected some patients.
Well, 90 is the test data. So let me show you another way to do this. So anytime you want to repeat something, just right click this and click duplicate. And so let's go ahead and do another test and score. And then I think the way they say to do this, that I think would be everybody, is let's go back to logistic regression. And I think, let me double check this, because there are different ways to connect this. All right, let's see if we have 303. Yeah, see at the bottom, 303. Oh, wait a minute. I apologize. You wanted predictions, not this. All right, so let's see if these are in order. Yeah, so that's everybody, okay? So, yeah, and I apologize for not pointing that out, and I'm not sure I made it clear in the book. If you want to do predictions on everybody, you need to connect it separately the way I showed you for whatever reason. So what you saw before was test patients only. The other thing, when you do it this way, notice you get the performance at the bottom as well.
Right.
So again, this is another way of showing you. Let's just, I apologize. I think that should have been made clear. So show the probabilities for 1, meaning heart disease. So in this patient, you see 0. They predicted 0.13. A 1, they predicted a 1. You can go down all the way and see how close it was. Again, 0.27 instead of 0, so forth and so on. So yeah, if you want to see all of them, you connect it this way. Any questions about that? But speaking of that, that's one of the problems when you connect the data sampler. You do have to be sure what goes out of here, how many patients. You can, again, do the whole data set if you want to without this, and then look at the results. Okay, Jim, you had a question?
Yeah, just related to that, I'm just wondering, so when you click on the data sampler, for instance, and you choose your sampling type as fixed proportion of data, and then you click on the test and score, and my default is cross-validation. What happens then? If do you have to have it consistent, or does it? I'm just trying to because I mean the data sampling could do a cross-validation there. And
yeah, it could.
Yeah,
good point. Is
Yeah.
I kind of avoid that. I mean, in other words, I just leave it as default 70-30. Now, in the book in a second, we're going to go ahead and immediately explain what is k-fold cross-validation. This is basically the way you shuffle the data and it tests on itself. And that's where you get your training performance. Your first look see is this cross-validation. And I think this is probably a good segue into opening up the book and starting on that about what is cross-validation. How did it come up with this? But there's no question you have made a little bit of a change when you send both training and test data, so that the breakdown is going to be, let's think, what did we decide? 90 and 273 or something. So the majority goes to training. But again, the main thing when you're doing a model, particularly classification, you're going to want to look at all of these, and we'll go over this in way more detail. This is just a quick overview. Any questions before we go to the book?
All good.
Okay. All right, let me see. So in fact, what we start with is model validation. Does anybody need to get a cup of coffee? Take a break for a second.
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, let's take
Just
a 5-minute
minutes.
break just to let people.
5 minutes. Yeah. I mean, it's almost overwhelming what you can do with, with a few mouse clicks. It takes time to process all of it.
Yeah, and I'm sure that I'm not aware of every shortcut and every secret, you know what I mean? So that's part of the reason why I'm not going to publish this book anytime soon until I feel like I've mastered it, completely.
Well, the issue with that, Bob, is I think because it's like there's no benchmark at the moment out there for Orange. So in a way, whatever you publish is probably all that would be available.
Yeah, there is no book on it, but it's kind of funny. Alfonso is super negative on having a book about Orange. He just he was beside himself because he thought the book has to be data science and orange is just a passing thing or whatever. And I
Yeah,
kind of said,
but
but I sort of said, for
yes,
those of us who don't program, it gives us a chance to actually do some stuff with data.
exactly. That's what I'm saying. I mean, somebody with a PhD in data science, you just can't talk to them about orange. It's like,
Yeah.
it's like some people saying that Windows is the greatest evil of all time. You shouldn't use Windows. You should just be using Unix or whatever. I mean, there are people who are,
Yeah. Well,
have strong opinions like
our
that.
people say that we shouldn't be using spreadsheets. Well, in my opinion, why not start with spreadsheets, do what you can do in a spreadsheet, and then move on to the next level? But I encourage people to know how to filter and do conditional formatting and all that stuff in Excel. Is nothing wrong with it. It's just for some of the other computation, I've found much better ways to do it than Excel. But I think, again, we need to be very humble about all this. On top of that, this is a tough area to learn. And I did mention it earlier, but if you're trying to teach people to program is the only way to learn data science, what you're saying to them is, I want you to learn 2 languages at the same time. That's a tough. I mean, if you got 2 years to do it, okay, but people on this call, I don't think are planning to spend 2 years doing it.
If you take away spreadsheets, then the number of publications on PubMed will probably drop to less than 100.
Yeah, I mean,
It's the standard for medicine, and I think that's what a lot of people don't realize. And I remember Viren once said that probably is the first or the second greatest software on earth.
Second. This is second best tool for everything, Excel. Bob, I'm really enjoying the way that you're able to take the data and the outputs and actually translate it like a true domain expert would to make sense of it. I think that's really, really critical. I'm just wondering if maybe you want to include examples like that in your book, because that will certainly make it stand out quite dramatically.
Yeah, well, let me show you what I'm going to have to break the news that I took out one section because I did, because it's been updated. This is probably as far as we'll get today, because I don't want to wear people out. But I have a new section on binary diagnostic test, and this is where all the odds ratios. But here's an actual example of diagnosing iron deficiency anemia with a ferritin level. And here's your true positives. This is again, and then this is the results you get. So my point is, this is a good example of real world stuff.
Yeah, I think it's very rare to be able to watch over the shoulder of giants as yourself. And this opportunity is quite special because you know both the domain and the data science, and you're probably one of the the leading authors and the leading people in the world with this much knowledge. And thank you for sharing it with us and for letting us watch over your shoulder while you do these things.
Well, thank you. That's. I think you're overly kind, I might add. But the point is, it is true though that that's somewhat of an uncommon combination where, let's say, somebody is passionate about medicine, is well trained, is passionate about data science. Usually, those two don't go together. So. It was interesting to me. I migrated from health informatics, really having done that for 2 decades, to data science, which I find more interesting, more challenging. It's more difficult. But anyway, I appreciate the kind words, and I hope this is helpful.
Oh, of course it is.
I mean, Bob, Viren is kind, and he is sometimes overly kind, but I have to add my voice to his, how he described you. One other thing, actually, which I was very interested with Orange. Yesterday, I have a huge data set, about like 60,000 patients, each one with 300, features, and it managed to load them all. I mean, on a laptop. So I'm just amazed how that was possible. I didn't expect it.
Yeah, I mean, I would normally say that was one of its limitations. It can't do big data. Now, big data is usually like more than 1 million rows or whatever. But the point is, for most of us, if you can do 10,000, 20,000, whatever, we're going to be happy. That's going to be adequate.
If you do want to see an example of how big data is handled, I'm happy to demonstrate a little bit around auto ML, but that's only if it doesn't take away from your class, Bob.
Okay, because again, one of the things in this last 5 years I played with is auto ML packages with Python. Some of those are very good. You don't have to know that much programming. Are you talking about auto ML with Python or what?
In this case, the models that I've built is nothing to do with medical data. It's on lease renewal. I have to look at data that people will understand without any domain knowledge so that I can explain it. But this is basically right-clicking stuff and saying, "Hey, go build me a model and pick the best model," kind of scenario. Yeah.
All right. Well, I think again, that sounds like something interesting we can add. Let's go. Is everybody back from break? I haven't checked the numbers here. I think so. Zidon, you want me to go ahead?
Yes.
Okay. And again, you want to plan to go to let's see, I guess that would be 9:30 your time.
I think so. I think taking into account we had some introductions and stuff, maybe till 9:30 will be good.
Okay.
Because I think at the bigger picture, probably we do need to spend enough time on this topic and maybe even repeat some things. Because as you said, probably this is the most important part for most of us clinicians to understand.
Yeah, and
how to evaluate and how to understand these concepts.
yeah, I think the thing I want to concentrate the most on though is understanding false positives, true positives, all that kind of stuff that we may have to put off till next time. We'll see. But let's just talk about again model evaluation. Let's start with, and this is my designation, by the way, is I'm going to say that most of what's done to prove a model, it generalizes, and that's what model validation is. If you create a model, how well does it do with data it hasn't seen yet? That's what model validation is. So when we talk about how do we go about it, most of the time you take the same data set and you divide it into train and test. And so I'm calling internal validation, meaning it's from the same data set. However, you can do everything on one data set and then take an external data set from a different time period, a different location, different hospital, and test on that. So that would be external validation. So getting back to this again, is if you you want to go so far as testing, seeing how your training data does, create the model, and then test it on data outside of this. You would start with just what we did with the data sampler. You would divide it to say 70 or 75%, and the rest would go to test. Now, it's important to understand that when you read about this in a book, they often talk about a validation data set, which is a tiny one, like 20%, that the data scientist uses to tweak the algorithms. In other words, they make change in the algorithms and they quickly test on this little validation data set to see if it made it better or worse, whatever, but they still test on the 20%. Also, unfortunately, because computer scientists and statisticians don't talk the same language, some people use validation data set as the same as test. We're trying to stop that and use test is just what it says. Validation is a tiny data set that you rarely use if you're going to tweak an algorithm, okay? One other thing I just added, I don't know if it's in your book or not. I don't think it is. It's very important. We're going to talk about data leakage. It's very important that you probably are going to be modifying your data. But the point is you split it first. You get the test data out there, you leave it alone, And then after you've done that, then you can go impute missing data and do feature engineering where you delete one variable and maybe add another, whatever. But we'll talk about that more, but that is a pearl. That's why I put important right here. And in the newer, if next session, I give you the new version, it'll have that in there. Okay, so what is K-fold cross-validation, which is pretty universal? Let's scroll down to this image here, figure 5.1. So the gray is all data. Training data is in that kind of light green. Blue data is test data. Now, I wish they would have added another color because there's blue inside of this diagram in the lower left, but the test data at the top, I think it for sure is the same thing as the test data down here. So what do? This is K5, which means 5 folds. Just look at it as like file folders, if you will. They're putting data in 5 folders, and then they have 5 filing cabinets, if you will. And so let's just take fold number 1. They'll train on these on 4 of the folders and test on the one blue one. Then they go to the next filing cabinet and they do it, except they do it on a different fold. And so this is just a matter of randomly training and testing. And so you do that 5 times, but actually the most popular number is 10. You can go in there and change that in orange and see if it makes a difference. And then you can do it more than once. I don't think in orange you can say do it twice, but in some programs, if you wanted to do K-fold validation, you could do as many times as you want to. So anyway, when you're done, that'll give you your performance based on, again, randomizing all of this and then training testing internally, if you will. And then the stratified just means that in each one of these folds, if cancer was 20%, in each one of these folders, it continues to be 20%. Otherwise, in a small data set, it might be skewed. What if one folder had only 1% cancer patients just because luck of the draw, it wasn't shuffled, so to speak. So stratifying makes sure that your proportion stays the same of the classes, which is very valuable. So now you can do performance evaluation on the training data. If you want to do the test data, it's been withheld, or it's so-called holdout. That's down here in beige, and that's what you would use. So I know that's complicated and it confuses people all the time. There are some people that have published studies that have only used K-fold cross-validation and published that. There have been people who have not used any test data whatsoever, which is definitely a no-no. There have been people who have not stratified. There are people who have modified the data and then split it into 70-30. Another no-no. All that should be in capital letters. Now, there are other ways to randomize the data and then test it and see if it's valid. This leave one out cross-validation, which is available in orange, is simply, instead of all these folds, you're going to train, or you're going to test on, say, 499 patients and test on 1 and keep changing that until you've tested on everybody. Sounds pretty tedious to me and time intensive, but that's what leave one out cross-validation. And bootstrapping is usually simple. Think about it as a bucket of data, and you want to form some new buckets. So you're going to take random data out of the original data set, and you're going to come up with these folders: Bootstrap 1, Bootstrap 2, Bootstrap 3. And while you're at it, you're going to also pick out test data sets. You're going to put that data back in with the original data set, and so that you've randomized it is really all it amounts to. And that's what bootstrapping is. So external validation, which the experts prefer, however, that's not the total answer. would prefer you test on data from somewhere else or from a different time period. I mean, again, theoretically, if you had 10 years of hospital data, you could test on the first 5 or train on the first 5, test on the last 5. The problem that you can see already is, though, you got to be darn sure you're comparing apples and apples. I mean, for instance, pre-COVID and COVID would be 2 different hospitalizations. That would interfere tremendously with your patient mix. Same would be true. You're gonna, let's say, compare data from a hospital across town, but it's kind of a hospital where nobody's insured and everybody's 4+ sick. That may not work out. So what we recommend doing at bare minimum is go ahead and immediately splitting your data. Doesn't have to be 70-30, could be 80-20. And then you go ahead and do cross-validation to determine the performance of your training data. If you're in the ballpark and know, hey, this looks promising, then you'll look at the test data and see how close it is. And we'll talk about what is overfitting. Don't even worry about that right now. So let's get into model discrimination. Is basically, again, can you separate the 2 categories or classes you're trying to separate, such as heart disease and no heart disease? If it's perfect separation, you wouldn't have any false positives and false negatives. So that essentially never happens. The gold standard, by the way, though, for that separation is the area under the curve, and we'll go over that. And model calibration, hopefully I've explained, it's really kind of an individual. How close is it to what is, how close is predicted to actual, and create a curve or plot as a result of that. You've already seen this curve. I'm going to keep going. There is an article, though, where they titled it Achilles heel, that calibration is Achilles heel of predictive analytics, because there have been studies that said, oh, look how well the model discriminates. And then when they went back and looked at calibration, it did a very poor job at either, say, identifying ones or zeros or both. So ideally, you want a model that's calibrated and shows good discrimination both. All right, the test and score, I think, let me look at this. I think we've gone over that okay. I don't think y'all can read this also. Predictions, again, if you connect it to test and score, it looks like you're just going to get test. But I think down here I showed, yeah. Well, I guess this is the other way to do it. Anyway, if you want to see everybody, you have to connect it a little bit differently. But I don't want to spend more time on it. This is where the bulk of stuff that's important. And again, we'll see how much we get through this, because I do not want to speed through this. So this confusion matrix that you're seeing here on the left is generic, where at the top is predicted, say 0, predicted 1. This could be 0 could be benign, 1 could be cancer. Actual means that they're, say, it had a biopsy in this situation. And so if you predict it's 0 and the R of 0, that's true negative. Let me see what's going on in the chat. Oh, okay. Thanks for posting. That's great. All right, so that's just the kind of a generic confusion matrix. And it can be 3 by 3, by the way. It wouldn't have to be 2 by 2, but most of the things that we predict are binary, admitted, not admitted, and so forth. But again, you can do a 3 by 3. So over here, this is the actual, I think, whoops, this was heart disease prediction with logistic regression. So it predicted 1, meaning heart disease, but it actually was a 0. So that's a false positive. Down in the lower left, it predicted 0, but it was positive, false negatives. So predicted 0 and it was 0. What is that? That is then true negative. And down here, it predicted it's heart disease, and it was, so that's a true positive. And then you can do totals, and notice this total is 213. So this is a confusion matrix just on the training data, not on the whole group. All right, so we're going to go, this is very important. And again, I suspect next month when we do this, I'm going to repeat it to some degree until I'm a hammer at home. Sensitivity, again, is the true positive rate of the positives in your data set. And it's also known as recall. So you have to burn that into your brain. Recall is the same thing as sensitivity. Specificity is all about negatives. Sensitivity is about positives. Specificity is about true negatives. And if you look at it, it's the true negatives over the true negatives plus false positives, because false positives are really negatives, right? If you have too many false positives in the denominators, it's going to drop the specificity. Precision is a pretty good term. It just means how precise are your positives. So that it's true positive over true positive plus false positive. So if you have a lot of false positive, guess what? That drops your precision. It's also called positive predictive value, or PPV. Burn that into your brain, unfortunately. So you've got the false positive rate, which I've already said is 1 minus specificity. You've got a negative predictive value, which is NPV. F1 score, they call that the harmonic mean. It basically, it's a very valuable, if you've got a recall and precision that are out of whack, one's high, one's low, let's say, then basically this gives you they call it harmonic mean, or kind of an average. You multiply its precision over recall over, precision multiplied by recall divided by precision plus recall multiplied by 2. Normal is 0 to 1. A good model ideally would be like 0.8, something like that. Accuracy is just what you think. It's the true positive and true negative over everything. So how accurate was in identifying true positive, true negative. Another pearl is if you have an imbalanced data set, again, 90% benign, 10% cancer, suddenly accuracy is no good. So that's another take-home point. If you want to type that into your book, type it in, because we're going to cover it many times. So I think, again, when you look at the table, let me just go down through here. False positive rate, this is just how you can calculate it, 14%. The sensitivity is 76%, specificity 88%. Precision, what percent of the positives are really positive? 85%. That's good. Negative predictive value was good. F1 score calculates to be 0.797. That's good. And all that tells you is your recall and your precision must have been pretty good. Accuracy is good. But notice I put accuracy should not be used if there is class imbalance. Let me see, there's a message in the chat here. Yeah, thank you. I always appreciate anything in the chat that supports this. So what I want to do is I want to end there, because I have added this a little bit about probability and odds, and this will come in handy when we do likelihood ratios. And I'll show you something. I can put it in the chat if it's still up here. This is a wonderful diagnostic test calculator. You put in the false positive, true positives, and hit compute, and suddenly it creates the tree. It creates your likelihood, your sensitivity, specificity, your ratio, and then we'll show how you can do pre-test probability and post-test probability using this next session. But in case, let me put that in the chat. It will be in the book. Okay, I think that that's all that you should be punished with today. I hope that on your own that you will go forward or back with your reading, depending on your time and your level of interest. Please do email me if you have questions where I explained something that was not entirely clear. I guess my question to you, were you able to do much of the orange stuff while I was talking? I mean, in other words, I prefer it that you pretty well go through all the things that I do, not just look at what I'm doing, but have you do it on your own. Were you successful?
Yeah, I could follow, but because we had many sessions, so I got used to actually working around Orange. I think some familiarity with Orange is actually necessary.
Okay, well, the good news again is there'll be a chapter on classification, a chapter on regression, and a chapter on tying it all together, where you'll have a lot of opportunities to do this on your own or with me as I do it. But I do prefer that you all to do it while I'm doing it. So all right, any other questions or additions? Let me again look at the chat. I may myself want to get a copy of those. I think I know.
Sorry, I was just going to say just one comment is, and it might relate to why people get different results, but the defaults.aws file, and I was a little confused until I could see what the output and inputs were, but the test and the score, if you click the test on the test data, and that would have been explained before, I'm just new, but if you click on the test data, then that actually does the testing on the testing set of the data sampler. So it actually worked correctly on me, but the default of the test and the score is actually a cross validation. So if no one realized that, and they should, I mean, from what I understand, you click on the test data for the test and score, if that's correct.
Yeah, somewhere in there, I think I saw, without an explanation, that they prefer you to do the predictions on the test score. But in point of fact, you can do it as I demonstrated on everybody. But I'm not sure. I may have to go back and look, make sure I didn't miss some subtle point to that.
Yeah. It does in every window show you at the bottom the subjects or the variables it's doing whatever it's doing up on. So for me, the default for test and score is 213 patients, which I suppose is would be the
that's
70%,
the training.
which is
Yeah,
the training
that's the
data.
training to 70%, right?
Yeah, but if you click on the confusion matrix and the ROC, you should be able to see the input, and the input should be 90. If you click on what's yours, for instance, Zayden, when you click on confusion
213.
matrix,
My confusion matrix is 213.
it actually should be. I mean, from what I understand, if you separate from the data sampler the fixed proportion, it actually all the testing, confusion, ROC, and everything should be 90. And the way to get that is when you click on test and score, the bottom option is test on the test data. So as long as you can't, I mean, that's what confused me a little bit. And then you get the confusion and thing to have actually on the 90. So you're actually using the testing step to do all these tests. That's confused me, and I think clicking on it gave the right sort of output. But I don't know, Bob, if that was intended.
Okay, well, one of the things you can do that I didn't demonstrate is you can easily, from your file menu, connect it straight to test and score, bypass, do a second one. In other words, have a second test and score that you connect to that same file, connect it to a couple of algorithms, and then compare the results. I mean, you can often run dual channels. We'll show that in some of the other exercises, which is very valuable. You could do it, in other words, you have two approaches, but you can run parallel networks and compare the two. Very easy, very quick.
Jim, you are absolutely right. So if I click on test data, it picks 90 patients that the model was not trained on. And actually, interestingly, that improves the AUC for the logistic regression model more than any of the others. So logistic regression is the best model here.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to burst people's bubbles, but over and over, it showed for the kind of data that you and I look at, and not only that, but logistic regression. First of all, it's been around forever. You can tweak it, and we can show you coefficients. In fact, that's going to be part of what I go over is how do you interpret a coefficient, which is a log odds. You can convert that to odds ratios. So that I'll have that ready for you next time. So that's an advantage of logistic regression. It's easier to explain the results than random forest. Did I see a hand raised or something?
Yeah, that's me, Bob. I've got a quick question. And I'm getting a little bit of confusing information when I'm looking online. So logistic regression, is that considered a form of machine learning as well?
No, most people would call that an older statistical tool. I mean, in other words, linear regression and logistic regression have been around quite a while, as has naive Bayes. Naive Bayes comes from 1763 when Bayes' theorem came out. So a lot of people would call those older statistical models. There's confusion. I have a friend that says there's no such thing as machine learning. It's all statistical learning. So you're going to hear some debate, but I would say to you, logistic regression is one of the older ones, whereas the newer ones are like random forest, XGBoost, support vector machines. Another old one is decision trees. We haven't looked at that in this section, but logistic regression has been out there for, I don't know, since 1960s, I think.
Yeah. Look, I know it's been around for a while, but some places like put it in, calling it's also valid as a machine learning technique, and others sort of say, oh, you can't call it a machine learning technique. So anyway.
Yeah, so it may get lumped together. What I tell you is I make a habit of selecting an algorithm from each family. If I have brand new data that I want to look at, I don't just use logistic regression. I use one from the major families. And I can tell you the decision tree never performs as well as these other ones. A K nearest neighbor never performs as well. So I tend to, and frankly, neural networks for the kind of data we're talking about doesn't perform as well. And believe me, test this on your own data and see what you come up with, because I think neural networks has its role, particularly in testing things that aren't linear functions. It's now used with, analyzing text and images and whatnot, but for simple data sets like we're looking at here, the kind of tabular data sets, it's hard to beat logistic regression and naive Bayes.
Bob, your friend, does it happen to be Trevor Hasty?
Is what though?
Trevor Hasty. He's published two of the very well-known books on machine learning from Stanford, and he doesn't call it machine learning. Like over and over, he keeps calling it statistical learning, elements of statistical learning with R, etc. And at the time I just wondered why the choice of words. And
well, yeah, it wasn't him. It was actually a guy that was a co-author of my informatics book. He gave me a really hard time saying there's no such thing. But I could up it everybody one greater, and that is 100% of everything we talked about is mathematical, including deep learning, including logistic regression. All of them is purely math. It's linear algebra and calculus, period. So, if you want to be really honest about it, this whole field is mathematics.
I think just my understanding, and I get pedantic about the choice of words, and this is one of the reasons I'm trying to stay away from the term artificial intelligence, because it's mostly sci-fi related as opposed to science related, it seems. But the concept seems to be that if you have a software that is capable of iteratively doing the calculations to get you the best results, then that is what is considered machine learning, as opposed to, you know, doing it in a way kind of manually, that you would do, for example, with other statistical packages, or the other way. Like in SPSS, you really have to by yourself do everything. Here, most things are done in the background and you get the results.
Yeah, and I would say, let me give you a slight difference here too. Is logistic regression clearly and linear regression are clearly formulas that simply, figure out the predictors, how well they predict based on coefficients they calculate by math. Whereas random forest is more complicated than that. It actually has a forest of trees. It's a parallel thing. You take some random aspects of the data of all these individual trees, and you figure out the best result, and then you average it. And so it really kind of learns over time, and XGBoost or boosting even more so, where that's sequential. Each new tree learns from the previous tree. So there's more active learning with machine learning than with the standard statistical test. But as I say, I would not underestimate the significance of logistic regression. And I think, again, you'll enjoy looking at the coefficients and figuring out, oh, is that what that means? So we'll try to cover that next time to make sure you do have a firm understanding of logistic regression. Any other questions, concerns, comments?
No, thank you. Any suggestions for the next workshop from the team here?
Maybe not have such a large gap. I know there were reasons that we postponed it from May. You know, we've had May and then now to August, but I think we're back on a monthly, right?
Speaking of that, I can talk to Zidon a little bit about it, but my US workshop is going to start new on September the 17th. That's a Saturday. It's conceivable. So your Saturday is my Friday evening. I don't know if you would want to shoot for September 17th for the next one.
I think that will be perfect.
Okay. Because in a way, it helps me, in other words, to do the two in the same 24-hour period. Then other weekends are free to do other stuff and whatnot.
Oh, absolutely. No, absolutely, Bob. Let's just make it easier for you. And
Okay.
that works well for us.
It's actually already booked in for 17th. You
Yeah.
know, and we pre-made the sessions.
What about the session?
Yeah, it's already, I think an invite's already been sent out for the 17th, or I think that was proposed when we discussed it right at the start.
Okay, well, we'll send out notices, put it in WhatsApp, and I'll send out a Zoom link.
Okay, that's perfect. I'll change the name of the group to September 17th. We'll work
Okay.
towards that.
Okay, that sounds great.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, take care.
Thanks a lot, Bob.
Okay,
Thank you.
okay, bye-bye now.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you.
Okay.